Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a discussion with respect to the importance of textile sector, the related challenges, and the way forward. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the debate surrounding the delimitation in the country and the way forward. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a look at 5 different articles from a special perspective of UPSC Prelims 2026 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to Textiles 2.0, Innovation and Sustainability. Mahatma Gandhi once said that Khadi is not a mere piece of cloth. It is a symbol of India's self-reliance. Now, this particular statement speaks about the importance of textiles and apparel sector. Now, what you have to understand is, especially after the independence, this particular sector has witnessed great developmental strides. But still what we are witnessing now is that there are certain issues which are plaguing the overall sector. So we have this particular column in the business section of the Hindu, which points towards certain issues. For example, the raw material prices, or the cost of capital, or the high labor costs, or the logistics issues. Now, you must understand that the government is basically aiming to increase the overall market size of the textiles and the apparel sector to almost $350 billion by 2030, including $100 billion of exports. Now, if we have to realize this particular vision, we'll have to rectify these structural challenges. Now, what we'll be doing today is we'll look at the importance of textile sector. We'll see what are the associated challenges in a broader framework. We'll see what have been the different government initiatives, and then we'll look at the way forward. Believe me, it is going to be a very comprehensive discussion, especially from the perspective of the Indian economy GS3 paper. Now, let's talk about the sector in general. What you have to understand is that this is one of the oldest sectors and one of the most important industries, most significant. Why? Not just because of its contribution to the overall economy, but because it is supporting the livelihoods of millions of Indians. That is what you have to understand. Next aspect is that it contributes substantially when we talk about the employment, exports, and GDP. Look at this particular data. It contributes to almost 2.3% to India's overall GDP. Almost 4.5 crore people are directly employed in this particular sector. And it has the employment of almost 10 crore people indirectly. Then we have, it contributes to almost 10.5% to India's export earnings, right? Now, what are the different subsectors when we talk about the overall sector in general? The very first is cotton textiles. You have to understand that India is the second largest cotton producer in the world, right? And it has basically 25%, almost 25% of the global output. Then we have the handlooms and the crafts. For example, India is the largest producer of jute. India is one of the largest producers of silk in the world. Then we have ready-made garments, including the man-made fibers, right? For example, we have nylon, we have polyester, we have acrylic, right? Then we have technical textiles. Now, this is very, very important. First of all, what are technical textiles? See, we have normal textiles, which are mostly for the decorative purpose. Then we have technical textiles, where the objective is not decoration, but performance. So what you have to understand is there can be different types of technical textiles. For example, we have geotextiles. You must have seen the geonets in the construction, or there can be medical textiles. For example, surgical gloves or gowns or bandages. Or let's say we have these technical textiles in the automotive sector. For example, the seat belts or the airbags. So this is a very important component. Now, what are the key markets for India? So we have the United States, we have the European Union, we have United Arab Emirates, and we have Bangladesh. Now, India is, as I already told you, one of the largest producers of jute and silk. Now, if you look at the overall size of the market of the textile sector, we'll see that it was almost $160 billion in the year 2023. Now, this is supposed to increase to almost, which the government also targets, to almost $350 billion. $350 billion, including $100 billion of the exports, right? Look at this textiles trade. We have almost $44.4 billion of exports in the financial year 22. Look at the other components. We have the share of India's textiles exports. We have the ready-made garments, almost 42.4%. The cotton yarn, fabrics, made-ups, handloom products. Then we have man-made yarn. Then we have the handicrafts, right? Now, this data you need not to mug up, but just for the overall understanding, I have provided this particular infographic. Fabric production in financial year 24. So we have the cotton yarn, almost 952. Then we have blended and 100% non-cotton yarn and the others. Now, here comes the important part. What are the issues and challenges facing the textile sector? The very first is fragmentation of the industry. Now, when I'm talking about the fragmentation of the industry, you will have to look from two different angles. One which is already provided, the second, this aspect. Now, what the situation we have is that we have certain clusters. We have certain clusters focusing upon certain specific activities. Let's say we have cluster A, which is focusing upon the production of the cotton. Then we have cluster B, which is focusing upon, let's say, the spinning of the cotton. Let's say we have the cluster C, which is focusing upon the production of the yarn. And finally, we have the cluster D, which is basically focusing upon the stitching of the garments. Now, these are all disparate at different locations. Now, this what ultimately does is it increases the overall logistics costs. There are logistics costs also. So it increases the overall costs. That's the first aspect. So the industry is fragmented. The second aspect is that most of the players we have in the market, in the textile sector, they are small and marginal. They do not have the adequate resources. They do not have the adequate resources to increase their productivity, to increase the overall efficiency, right? And also it reduces the economies of scale. See, what is economy of scale? Just understand. Let's say you have a particular firm which is manufacturing 100 units. 100 units of any commodity. And every unit, it is priced at almost 100 rupees. Now, the overall production of this particular unit, it increases to 1,000, right? It increases to 1,000. Now, the cost of the unit, initially, it was almost 100 rupees. Now, automatically, this particular cost would reduce because the fixed costs are now spread. Right? So what we are trying to say is, if a firm reduces lesser number of commodities, then the per unit cost is more. If the same firm produces more number of units, definitely the cost per unit would reduce, right? So that is the kind of economies of scale we are talking about. Next aspect is outdated technology. As I already told you, since we have the small number of players, they do not have the adequate resources, and therefore they cannot invest in upgradation of technology. Now, upgradation of technology is very important. If you have to compete with different players around the world, you'll have to upgrade yourself. And that is something a very serious concern. And this ultimately affects the productivity and quality. And it also hampers the competitiveness. Now, when I'm talking about the competitiveness, what you have to understand is, I'm not just talking about the domestic competitiveness. I'm also talking about the competitiveness with respect to a firm, let's say in Vietnam, which is producing the textiles, or let's say a firm in China. So you'll have to be equally competitive. And for that, you'll have to invest in technology. Then we have high production costs. As the article says, that the overall cost of the raw material, of the labor, of the power supplies, the water supplies, it is comparatively high when compared to the other countries around the world. Right? So this is a factor which must be considered. And then we have restrictive labor laws. What do we mean by that? See, these sectors, as I told you, they do not have, these industries, they do not have the adequate resources. So again, the kind of labor laws we have, they're very rigid. They do not allow for quick hiring and firing. So again, this industry is a seasonal industry. So this hampers the overall capacity of the units to basically hire people at will and fire people at will, right? So this is again a very serious concern. Then let's talk about the infrastructure. As I told you, that we have first of all fragmented supply chain. And moreover, we do not have a robust logistics aspects. So when I'm talking about the logistics, I'm talking about the transportation, I'm talking about the packaging, I'm talking about the storage facilities. So we do not have proper logistics facilities. Poor access to ports and slow custom clearances. Now, if we'll have poor access to ports, definitely the export competitiveness would be hurt. We'll not be able to export to different markets around the world. Slow customs clearances, the lead time would be more. There would be a lag. Right? And therefore, the other countries which are basically accepting India's exports, they would now depend upon some other countries around the world. Then we have the competition from the neighboring countries. You must have seen, whenever you buy products from Adidas or Nike, it has that particular tag which says that it is produced in, manufactured in Vietnam or manufactured in Bangladesh. Why? Because the overall costs of production in these countries is quite low. So we have these multinational companies now shifting the production facilities in these countries around the world. So this is again a challenge for India because these countries are providing the lower labor costs and superior export incentives. Then we have environmental concerns. See, there are certain specific sectors in the overall supply chain of textiles industry which are highly polluting in nature. Let's talk about the dyeing and the finishing aspects. Now, these industries, they basically produce different chemicals and then they are basically diverted to the river channels and they pollute the overall environment. And therefore, the compliance also becomes a challenge. What do I mean by the compliance aspect? Look, we have some of the very important markets in European Union and US. Now, over there are certain standards which you have to follow. So what they say is that if you want basically us to accept your products, you will have to make sure that you abide by the environmental standards or the labor standards. But because we do not have the proper robust environmental standards in place, therefore what happens ultimately, these countries do not accept our product. Then we had the COVID-19 impact. Why I have mentioned is because the COVID-19, it decimated some of the very important players, some of those small industries which were dependent upon the overall manufacturing because there was a complete halt to the supply chains and still to this day they have not been recovered. Then we have lack of branding and marketing. Branding and marketing is one of the very important aspects. Let's talk about Levi's. Let's talk about the Adidas. You must be aware that they invest a lot of their revenues in the overall marketing. And that's one of the reasons that people are more inclined to buy their products. Though in quality terms, they can be equally matched with some of the Indian brands. But still, we prefer those brands because there's a kind of impression which is created in the minds of the people through the marketing. So therefore, we also need to focus upon the marketing and branding of the products. And therefore, if we'll do that, it would increase the overall global recognition. Now, what have been the government initiatives? The very first is production linked incentive. You already know that the PLI scheme is for different sectors, automotive sectors, electronic sector. It was also for the textile sector. What is production linked incentives? Today, I'm producing, this year, I have produced 100 units of the commodities. Next year, the production increases to almost 120 units. So the increment is almost of 20 units. So I'll be given the incentives on these 20 additional units which I have produced. This is the overall gist of the PLI scheme, right? So again, this has been a boost for the textile sector in the man-made fibers, apparels, and technical textiles. Please know that the government of India is focusing upon this particular sector, the sunrise sector, what we call as the technical textiles. Very, very important. Scheme for integrated textile parks. What is the very objective? See, the very objective is to provide these clusters, which has the plug and play facility. What is plug and play facility? That I am making an infrastructure, which has some of the already existing things in place, the essential services. For example, let's say the power lines or the electricity, or let's say the water supplies, or let's say you have certain machineries which are needed. So there is the already placement of these essential machines. That is plug and play model, right? World-class infrastructure, and in order to set up these textiles units so as to basically exploit the economies of scale, the economies of scope, and the economies of agglomeration. Do study about it, right? So 66 textile parks have been approved and 23 are functional as of now. Then we have National Technical Textiles Mission. Just the overall objective is to create India, the global hub of these technical textiles, be it smart textiles, be it the textiles used in the automotive. As I gave you the example, the airbags, the seat belts, the surgical equipments, we have the gloves, we have the bandages, right? So this is very important, the GeoNet, right? Amended Technology Upgradation Fund Scheme. Again, the very objective is to provide the necessary capital so that that capital can be used to increase the overall technological base. Integration of technology is very, very important because if we'll keep the whole process manual, we won't be able to compete with the other players, right? So integration of technology is very, very important. That is one of the very important aspects of Amended Technology Upgradation Fund Scheme. Capital subsidies for the upgradation of the machinery. As of 2022, more than 6,000 crores have been given. Then we have this particular Samarth scheme, scheme for capacity building in the textile sector. We have a lot of youths working in this particular sector, mostly through the informal enterprises. Now, the overall objective is to give them the adequate skills so as to train more than 1 million people. Now, see, as I said, that integration of technology is very important. But you will say, sir, how? Let's say we have the computer aided design, or let's say we have the computer aided manufacturing. If I am basically integrating technology into this aspect through the CAD or through CAM, then people need to be skilled in this particular domain, right? And for that, adequate provisions should be there. Adequate machinery should be there to provide that particular skill, acquisition of skill. So this becomes very, very important. Mega integrated textile region and apparel park scheme, what we call as PM Mitra, so as to create 7 mega textiles parks across India with modern infrastructure, state-of-the-art facilities, integrated logistics. Again, the overall objective is to provide the important needed infrastructure so as to make sure that there is productivity, there is economy of scale, and there is the overall enhancement in the overall output. Export promotion scheme. This is again a very important aspect because we are focusing upon increasing the textiles export. For example, we have the rebate on the state and central taxes and levies. Now, the overall objective is to provide this kind of rebate or subsidy to the exporters so that the overall export can increase around the world to boost the textiles and garment exports. Then we have handloom and handicrafts development. Now, this is the most vulnerable aspect or segment of the industry because they are basically doing everything on their own, through their own hands. So they'll have to compete with those big power looms. So what we are doing is we have had different programs, for example, National Handloom Development Program or the Comprehensive Handloom Cluster Development Scheme, just to provide the incentives to these handlooms manufacturers or handicrafts, support for marketing, skill development, infrastructure in the overall handloom sector. Now, what should be the way forward? As I told you, that we have to focus upon the modernization and technology upgradation. We already have schemes which are giving the capital subsidy, which are providing the credit, but that should be enhanced. And that should be enhanced so as to make sure that we have adequate capital and credit for these small players in the market. That is really very important. Accelerate the modernization in the traditional sector, specifically when I'm talking about the handlooms or the handicrafts, right? Adoption of Industry 4.0 technologies. We are already working in different domains. There has been an achievement in different domains, for example, artificial intelligence or machine learning, or let's say the blockchain, which can be used in the overall supply chain. So that should be integrated. That should be integrated so as to enhance the overall productivity of the sector. Then we have the building of the infrastructure. We need to focus upon creating those clusters through PM Mitra scheme or the other schemes so as to make sure that these textile parks, they provide the necessary infrastructure to these players in the market, especially the small players. Mega parks and improving the access, ports, roads, and logistics. Again, as I told you, that there is the huge logistics costs which is involved. So we have to minimize this logistics cost in order to make sure that we have reduced overall costs. Because ultimately what happens is that if we have any aspect of the supply chain which is having more of costs, ultimately the end consumer has to bear it. So that has to be looked into account. Then we have enhancing the export competitiveness, focusing upon branding, marketing. Then we have the strategic trade agreements. Now we already know that India is in the process of having these trade agreements with different countries and blocks around the world, for example, with UK or EU. Now, textiles has to be made a very important component in the overall trade agreement, right? Focus on sustainability. We need to come up with eco-friendly practices, right? Because if we are going to have the carbon intensive production mechanism, right? Or if the sector is going to have more of carbon footprints, we will not have these markets accepting the Indian products, Indian commodities. So that is one of the very serious concerns. Also, we need to focus upon some of the other areas. Let's say the organic cotton or reducing the water and chemicals in the overall supply chain. Organic cotton becoming one of the very important products in demand in different countries around the world. So that can be another avenue. Then we have diversification into the technical textiles. As this is rapidly growing, as we will advance, as different sectors of the economy would grow, definitely the need and importance of technical textiles would also grow. Be it construction, be it the medical sciences, be it the engineering aspect. So we have to adequately focus upon the technical textiles. Adequate resources must be given so that these firms and enterprises can come up with their own products, new products. Especially what we can do is we can focus upon the capacity building through the skills, through the Samarth scheme, expanded to cover the new age skills. As I told you, computer aided design and computer aided manufacturing. Very, very important. Use of softwares in the overall design and manufacturing of the commodities. Policy reforms and ease of doing business. As I told you, that we need to focus upon the labor laws. We need to make the labor laws more flexible so that these enterprises can basically hire people at their own will. Definitely there has to be certain minimum social security architecture in place. Nobody is denying that. But still, because of these rigid labor laws, what we are seeing is that the overall productivity of the sector is suffering. Providing tax incentives and creating favorable environment for the foreign investments, because we have a lot of these incoming players who are willing to invest in the country. So we need to provide them the favorable environment. What we are trying to say is that this is one of the very important sectors, but it is suffering from certain very important issues, primarily in the form of obsolete technology, primarily in the form of lack of adequate credit, small players in the market, so that we are unable to focus upon the economies of scale, economies of scope. So we need to adequately focus. We need to basically come up with these things. We already have schemes in place. We need to expand those schemes, make the coverage more broad. That is what you have to understand. Let's have a mains practice question. The textile industry in India not only contributes significantly to the overall economy, but is one of the mainstay of the employment. However, in the recent times, the sector is struggling with various issues. Elaborate. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer in this question. And yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button and also let us know through the comments. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to Redrawing India, role of delimitation. Recently, we had the union government declaring that India is going to have its next census exercise in 2 phases in 2026 and 27. Now, this has again sparked the debate with respect to delimitation. Question is, what is delimitation? Delimitation is the process of fixation of the number of territorial constituencies and their boundaries. Delimitation is carried on the basis of the population, and population is ascertained on the basis of the census. Please understand that we have had many of the South Indian states who in 1960s and 70s invested a lot in the family planning measures so as to control the overall population growth rates and to focus upon the better standards of living. Therefore, they were able to control the total fertility rates. On the other hand, we had these North Indian states which witnessed a population boom. So what they're saying is, if the current population is used as the basis of delimitation, that would lead to the compromise of the interests of these South Indian states. So in that particular light, we have the Andhra Pradesh Chief Minister, who has said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will address the concern of these Southern Indian states. So what we are going to do is, we will see what delimitation is all about, what are the different constitutional provisions, what can be the possible scenario in different cases, and what should be the way forward. Again, a part of GS2, Indian Constitution Amendments, significant provisions. Now, first of all, as I told you, what is delimitation? Before that, let's talk about the constituency. What is constituency? Constituency is a particular area with a set of people who basically elect their representative. That is what a constituency is. When we talk about the Lok Sabha constituency, just look at this particular image. This is with respect to the 2019 elections. So you can see there are numbers, and every number point towards a particular constituencies. That is what you have to understand. So we have the constituencies also reserved for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. You can just look at this particular map. Then we have the constituencies with respect to the state also. For example, right now we have in this particular map the constituencies with respect to the Legislative Assembly of Uttar Pradesh. So we have in total 403. Over here we have 543. That is what you have to understand. Now, what is delimitation? As the population is a dynamic concept, it increases or decreases. Therefore, the number of seats are also readjusted and rationalized. That is the overall gist of delimitation, right? So it's the process of fixing the number of seats and the boundaries of territorial constituencies for each state for the Lok Sabha and the legislative assemblies. What are the articles? We have Article 82 and 170 subclause 3. 82 talks about the House of the People and 170 talks about the Legislative Assembly. That is what you have to understand on the basis of the census. Also, we have this particular delimitation which is used to reserve the seats for the SCs and STs. I have already told you we have these seats reserved for the SCs and STs in proportion to the population as ascertained by the census. Why this is in news? See, what the constitution says is, and we'll go into the depth, that the delimitation which is to be carried out now, that would be carried out after the first census, which is carried out after the year 2026. Now, again, see, we have already had the census of 2021 being delayed because of the COVID-19 and also the alleged negligence on the part of the government. But what many commentators are saying is that the kind of census we are going to have, that would form the basis of the delimitation. And therefore, we have these South Indian states which are concerned. Now, who performs the delimitation? Some of the very important aspects related to the prelims. So we have the Delimitation Commission, which is constituted on the basis of the Act of the Parliament. It has been constituted 4 times, 52, 62, 92 and 2002. Who all are the members of the Delimitation Commission? Look at this. This is a press note of 2022. It says, basically, Delimitation Commission consists of, it's headed by a retired Supreme Court judge, the Chief Election Commissioners and the Election Commissioners of various states. The meeting was presided by Justice Kuldeep Singh, Chairman of the Delimitation Commission, Shri B.B. Tandon, Election Commissioners of India and State Election Commissioners of all the states. So just have this thing in your mind. What is the basis of delimitation? There is Article 81, which talks about this principle of rationalization and readjustment. The principle is that the ratio between the number, that is the number given to a particular state, number of seats, and the population of a state, so far as practicable, should remain same for all the states, so as to maintain that parity among different states. That's what you have to understand. Now, again, see, what we are saying is, these South Indian states, they really worked a lot with respect to family planning measures and they were able to control the fertility rates. So what they're saying now is that instead of being incentivized, instead of being given the incentives, we are now being disincentivized. Because now if the delimitation takes place, we'll be given lesser number of seats and that would compromise the overall political power in the system. States are very important, or one of the most important constituents of the overall political system. So if you have the redistribution and the rationalization of the seats on the basis of the current population trends, if the rationalization and redistribution is on the basis of the current population trends, that would lead to the compromise of the interests of South Indian states. Again, in order to understand this, we have had the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976. What it said, that the seats would remain frozen till the year 2000. Next for 25 years, the seat would remain frozen. So the seats would be on the basis of the 1971 census. At that particular time, the population of the country was 54.8 crores. Important number, and we'll correlate how. 54.8. So per Lok Sabha seats, total number of seats were 443. Per Lok Sabha seats, there was an average representation of 10.1 lakh people. 10.1 lakh people per Lok Sabha seats. Then there was this 84th Constitutional Amendment Act, which said that this particular freeze is now to be extended till the year 2026. So this is what you have to understand. So in total 50 years. But here's the crux. What it also said was that though the total number of seats would remain the same, but we will go with the readjustment and rationalization inter se. Let's say, understand this concept, very, very important. Let's say you have a particular state, and this state within 20 years, let's say you had some population over here, some population here. In 20 years, the population of this particular area doubles, and the population of this particular area, it increases 1.5 times. So there has to be a readjustment. That is what the readjustment in a particular state. We are not increasing the total number of seats. We are just readjusting the total number of seats. That's what the objective is. That was on the basis of 1991 census. And further, the 87th Constitutional Amendment said that the readjustment and rationalization would be on the basis of 2001 census. That is what you have to understand. Total seats would remain same. Here are two questions with respect to the importance of Delimitation Commission. One thing which is very important is, according to the Constitution, the orders of Delimitation Commission, they are not subject to any code of law. But recently we had a particular case in which the Supreme Court said that there is an aspect of judicial review to the orders of the Delimitation Commission. I would be really happy if any one of you gives me the name of that particular case. Let's go to the next aspect. What is the significance of delimitation? The very first is fair representation. Since population is a dynamic concept, since it changes, and once we align the distribution of the political power, then it is in line with the aspects of the democracy, right? Because we believe in one citizen, one vote, one value. So this delimitation basically gives life to this particular principle. Then we have aspects of equity, equitable distribution of seats, very important, prevents underrepresentation or overrepresentation. We need to make sure that there is equity with respect to the representative aspects. because we are a representative democracy. So this equitable aspect is very important. Reserved seats for SCs and SCs. We have marginalized populations in the form of SCs and SCs. So adequate representation is very important for these sections of society, and for that, delimitation is very important. Federalism. Tell me the case, or I'll say it. It was the SR Bomey case in which the Supreme Court very categorically said that federalism is an integral part of the basic structure of the Constitution. Right? So therefore, this becomes very important in order to make sure that different constituents, we have different states, they enjoy equal political power or equitable political power. It should not be like one state is enjoying more political power just because it has more population. That should not be the case. Again, it also increases the harmony and the peace among these different sections of society. Population control measures. See, this is very important. Initially, the objective over here, we had the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act and the other acts. The overall objective was to freeze the seats. Why? So as to make sure that these North Indian states, which have not basically invested a lot in the family planning measures, they take some steps. But what we are witnessing now is that this has not taken place. So it questions this particular aspect. It questions this objective or the very mandate why the seats were frozen. So we need to come up with a new mechanism. That is what the objective is. What are the concerns related to the delimitation? Again, as I said, that if you are basically having the current population trend as the basis of the delimitation, that would compromise the political power of the South Indian states. This is a very good infographic. Please pay attention. Now, let's say we are having the total number of seats at 543 and we are keeping it constant. But on the basis of the population trends, we are readjusting the seats. If the seats are constant, if the number of seats is retained at 543 and reapportioned among the states based on the projected population in 26, look at this. What would happen in these 4 states? UP, the current seats are 80, that would increase to 91. For Bihar, it would increase to 50 from 40. Rajasthan, 25 to 31. And for MP, 29 to 33. There would be an overall increase. Look at what would happen for the state like Kerala. From 20, it would reduce to 12. There would be a reduction of almost 8 seats, right? So this is the concern which these South Indian states are having. For Karnataka, there would be a reduction of 2 seats. So over here, we have these seats increasing. And for these South Indian states, decreasing, just because they did not give adequate attention to the family planning measures. Strange. Now, we have, let's say, if we are, the total number of the seats is increased to 848, basis on the projected population of 26. What would happen to UP? From 80, it would increase to 143, 63 increase, Bihar 40 to 79, 39 number of seats are increased, Rajasthan from 25 to 50, almost double, right? And look at this, for Kerala, nothing would happen. It would remain same at 20. For Karnataka, from 28 to 41, just an increase of 13 seats. So this is the concern which these states are having. Between northern and southern parts, population disregards the progress made by the southern Indian states. Again, understand, when we talk about the aspects of federalism, there has to be equitable political power. We cannot give undue advantage to a particular state just because it has not fared well on the family planning aspects, right? Also, understand the southern Indian states, they almost comprise 18% of the total population of this country, right? And their contribution to the overall GDP is more than 35%. When we talk about the contribution made to the economy. So they need to be incentivized, what we are saying. Disproportionate benefit to the northern Indian states. Now, also, we have a very good infographic. Now, this was from the Indian Express. See, I told you, I gave you the number. In 71 census, we had the total population as at 54.8 crores. Per seat of the Lok Sabha, there was a representation of almost 10.1 lakh people per Lok Sabha seats. If I keep this particular proportion same, and I now redistribute the seats, look what would happen. Seats at the same ratio. The total number of seats in the Lok Sabha would increase to almost 1400. And see what would happen in the state of UP. It would increase from this particular state to that of 250. For Bihar to 169, for Rajasthan 282, and for Kerala just an increase from 20 to 36, very small increase. If we are keeping the seats at 15 lakh ratio, right, the ratio is now fixed at 15 lakh, then also the increase would be too much for these 4 states and very less for these southern Indian states. That's a kind of a comparative picture which I'm trying to give you. You need not to mug up the data, just understand what is the crux which is involved here. Now, next aspect is that of the inadequate funding. We already know that we have the Finance Commission, Article 280, which uses one of the very important parameters of population for the devolution. I'm not saying it's just the population, but one of the important parameters is the population in order to give recommendations with respect to the devolution of funds. So if you'll have these northern Indian states having more population, more resources would be given to them. So that is against the very principles of federalism. Then we have affecting the reservations for SCs and SCs. Shift of power would be there towards the north, and also it would affect the distribution of seats for the reserved. That is again a very important concern. Now, what are the international practices related to the delimitation? We have the very first example of US. See, in the US, what happens is that we have the total number of seats of the House of Representatives, analogous to the Lok Sabha in India, to 435. Right? Over there, what happens is that there is a kind of proportion which is followed. So almost from 1911 to 2020, there has been a 4-time increase in the overall population. But there has been a kind of a readjustment in a way that it does not affect any interest of the state negatively, right? That is what you have to understand. Method of equal proportion does not result into any significant gain or loss for any of the states. Then we have EU. In the EU, we have the European Union Parliament, which basically uses digressive proportionality. What does it mean? Let's say we have 100 people in total, right? And there are 10 seats. Out of these 100 people, we have a particular section comprising of 20 peoples, right? So adequately, if I were to have, if the election takes place for these 100 people, so we need to have 2 people out of these 10 representing these 20 people, right? But in the aspect of digressive proportionality, what would happen is that the minority would be given more seats, right? They would be given more seats. This is what the aspect of digressive proportionality is all about. So what the authors are saying is, what we can have is a kind of a scenario where the South Indian states are given some more seats, not just on the basis of their population, but some seats in addition. What can be the way forward? The very first is extend the freeze on delimitation. What Indira Gandhi did, what Atal Bihari Vajpayee did, we can do the same. We can extend the freeze. Second is permanently freeze the seat redistribution. In the very first case, what we are saying is that 543 remains 543. We are not changing. But internally, we can readjust. But in the second point, what we are saying is that we are not even going for the readjustment. We will not go for the readjustment. Third is balance delimitation with the decentralization. Very, very important aspect. See, what we are trying to say. Look, this is very important to have a proper distribution of seats. But more than that, what is really important is there has to be proper decentralization. We have some of the very important subjects in the union list. Why can't those subjects be transferred to the states? Ultimately, the states are bearing the largest expenditure, right? So they need to be given more power. So they need to be transferred these subjects. Increase the number of seats in each state. Keep the total number of seats as 543. But when we talk about the state legislative assemblies, increase the total number of seats. And therefore also there should be an increase in the financial devolution. What must be kept in mind is 3 things. The very first is that this should not lead to the compromise of the South Indian states. They have really invested a lot. They have increased the overall human living indicators because they had these practices where they control the fertility rates. That should be the very first point. Second, federalism is a core aspect of the basic structure. We need to make sure that different constituents have same or equitable political power, right? Third is that there has to be an importance given to the stakeholder approach. Center should not unilaterally come with its own plans. There has to be a proper stakeholder approach and different stakeholders must be consulted. So this is something which you need to understand. Let's have a mains practice question. The upcoming delimitation exercise in India is expected to address the demographic shifts, but also raises the concerns over the federal balance and representation. Critically examine the key issues and challenges associated with the delimitation and suggest measures to ensure equitable representation while maintaining political stability. Believe me guys, very, very important topic, especially for the upcoming mains. So have these ideas in mind and do write a particular answer on this question. Let's go to the next section. Coming to the simplified section, we have the first topic which focuses upon the new toll system. Let's have the gist of the article. Prior to having the FASTags, we had a kind of a system which was based upon the manual toll collection, manual collection of fees at the tolls. Now, this process was very time intensive. It led to the increase of traffic congestions and increase in travel times. Therefore, the government came up with the FASTags, which is based upon the RFID, radio frequency identification. Now, what we find is even in the FASTags, there is a kind of a lag which is involved. and that also leads to traffic congestions. In order to avoid that, the government is coming up with a new technology, which is gantry-based multi-lane free flow system, which is a mix of passive RFID and automatic number plate recognition. We'll see what this technology is all about. Now, this topic is really very important, not just from the perspective of prelims, but also mains, and we will see why, right? So let's go through this topic. Daily traffic chaos, it's also fueled by the toll booths and plazas run by the Municipal Corporation of Delhi, MCD. Primary culprits behind the massive jams seen during the mornings and the evening peak hours. The issue was raised at the recent meeting between the centre and the Delhi government on a plan to decongest the city, which includes the ongoing big infrastructure projects being executed by the NHAI to improve the connectivity between Delhi and neighbouring cities. There are over 150 MCD toll booths, of which 13 are radio frequency identification enabled. Over 1 lakh commercial vehicles enter Delhi daily, of which more than 50% are cabs. The civic body earns around 800 crores a year from the toll charges. The NHAI highlighted that this significant traffic congestion at Delhi's borders is attributed to the MCD toll plaza operations. Official said a possible solution to the address this particular issue is implementing the gantry-based multi-lane free flow system. As vehicles approach the gantry, their FASTag and license plates are automatically scanned. This allows the system to electronically deduct the appropriate toll amount from the driver's prepaid account without the need to stop or slow down. The NHAI has asked the civic body to expedite the process of setting up the MLFF tolling systems at the 5 border areas. So let's have a look at the RFID. In the RFID system, what happens is you have the tag, which is attached to the assets, and then it transmits the data to the antenna, receives the stored data from the tag, and then it is sent to the RFID reader and ultimately to the computer. So there is a kind of a lag which is involved. So you have the closed gates, then the car comes, and then there would be a transmission of data, and then the gate would open. So there's a kind of lag which is involved. In multi-lane free flow system, look what happens. You have the gantry which is there. This is the kind of gantry which is there. There are no gates which are actually here, right? So it is on the basis of the gantry. There are the automatic number plate recognition systems and passive RFID system. They would recognize the particular car and automatically the amount would be deducted. That is the kind of usage. This is the gantry, what we call gantry-based multi-lane free flow system. Why this topic becomes important? Look at this question. 2024 mains. What is the technology behind being employed for the electronic toll collections on highways? What are its advantages and limitations? What are the proposed changes that will make the process seamless? Would this transition carry any potential hazards? Also, look at this question from the prelims. Consider the following communication technology: closed circuit television, CCTV, radio frequency identification, wireless local area network. Which of the above are considered short range devices technologies? Do answer in the comment section. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to the National Population Register and the National Register of Citizens. With the declaration by the Union Government that we are going to have the census, the next census exercise is going to be held in 2026 and 27 in 2 phases. We have this new aspect of National Population Register and the National Register of Citizens. So this becomes very important. NPR is a list of usual residents in the country, whereas NRC is basically with respect to the citizens. So we will see what are the different complexities and intricacies of the topic. The announcement of the census to be conducted in 2 phases in 26 and 27, not only to delimitation and implementation of the Women's Reservation Bill, but also paves the way for the National Population Register to be updated and the National Register of Citizens. NPR and NRC. 2 different things. Important. There can be a possible prelims question. While the NPR would likely to be updated during the House listing phase of the census next year, taking forward to the NRC remains a decision of the government. While the government's announcement on Wednesday made no mention of the NPR or NRC, census enumeration and updating the NPR were cleared back in December 2019 by the cabinet. The NPR, what is NPR? The NPR, the National Population Register, is a precursor to the NRC and the same stands enshrined in the law. The NPR, which is an enumeration of the usual residents, it's not just about the citizens, but the usual residents of the country, and is a data collection exercise based upon the voluntary disclosure of information by the people and is governed by the citizenship, registration of citizens and issue of national identity card rules of 2003. The rules were framed under the subsection 1 and 3 of section 18 of the Citizenship Act 1955. Under Rule 4, titled as Preparation of the National Register of Indian Citizens, Sub-rule 4 says, during the verification process, particulars such as the individuals whose citizenship is doubtful shall be entered by the local registrar with appropriate remark in the population register for further inquiry, and in case of doubtful citizenship, the individual or the family shall be informed in a specific pro forma immediately after the verification process is over. So it also talks about the NRC. What you have to understand, the data for the NPR was first collected in 2010 along with the house listing phase of 2011 census. In 15, this data was further updated in a door-to-door survey. The Modi government in 2016, picking out Aadhaar as a key vehicle for the transfer of government benefits and putting weight behind it, the NPR took a backseat. Whenever we are talking about the distribution of the benefits, right? So the government, what it did, it basically depended upon the Aadhaar, right? So the aspect of NPR was subsided. So therefore, the importance of NPR, it basically reduced. So that is the overall thing which you'll have to understand, and we'll also try to link with a particular PYQ, right? This particular situation. Through a notification on August 3rd, 2019, the Registrar General of India revived it. The decision had to come against the background of a national-wide stir against the CA. We all know that there were a lot of protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act, the proposed nationwide NRC, and the NRC process in Assam that excluded almost 2 million people, right? 19 lakhs. However, following the protests against the CA, Prime Minister Modi said in December 19 that the government had not decided on conducting the NRC. Conducting the NRC had been inserted in the Citizenship Act of 1955 through an amendment in 2003 under the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government. Look at this, NPR and census. What is the difference? Legal framework with respect to NPR is Citizenship Act of 1955. Legal framework of census is the Act of 1948. Includes residents, both citizens and non-citizens. Captures the socio-economic and demographic data of Indian citizens. Important. Verification is mandatory with local level scrutiny based upon self-declaration, purpose, database for governance and potential NRC. So it is basically the base for the NRC. General population statistics. Look at this. We have NPR and NRC, residence of India in the NPR and verification of Indian citizenship, citizenship rules of 2003, citizenship rules of 2003, Rule 4 and Rule 4A. Here the rules, sub-rules are different. Includes all the residents regardless of citizenship. Then we have only the Indian citizens and their status, stand-alone or preliminary database for NRC, citizenship determination exercise. Look at this question of 2014. Why this topic becomes important? What is NPR? So have the basics cleared, right? Two parallel run schemes of the government, that is the Aadhaar and the NPR, one as voluntary and the other as compulsory, have led to the debates at national level and also litigations on merits. Discuss whether or not both the schemes need to run concurrently, analyze the potential of the schemes to achieve the developmental benefits and equitable growth, distribution of the benefits, welfare, right? That is the aspect of this particular question. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is with respect to a very important concept related to targeting the antimicrobial resistance. Just before a few days, we had a discussion with respect to the antimicrobial resistance. Let's have the gist of the article. What, first of all, are microbes? So we have different microbes, for example, parasites, fungi, viruses, bacteria. In order to basically counter them, we have the antimicrobials in the form of antibiotics, antivirals, antifungals, right? Antimalarials. But what we see is, specifically when we talk about the antibiotics, that they have with time proved ineffective. Why? Because these bacteria, they are increasing their resistance with respect to these medications. And this is a very serious health concern. So very first aspect is antimicrobials. It can be antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasites, antifungals. You already know we have bacteria, we have fungi, we have viruses, parasites. You can just have a glance through that. So how to basically deal with this? See, we have a limited supply of antibiotics, right? And if the resistance would increase, definitely that would cause a very serious public health concern. So we need to come up with new technologies or new mechanisms. One of the ways is bacteriophages. Now what is this? These are good viruses. They basically attach to the bacteria, transmit the DNA, and ultimately lead to the explosion of the overall surface of that particular bacteria. So the bacteria dies. That is a kind of a new technique we have, bacteriophage, right? We'll study about that. First, let's talk about the antimicrobial resistance. So it spreads through different ways. Antibiotics are given to food-producing animals or crops. Animals develop the drug-resistant bacteria, then it goes to the humans. So ultimately, there is the flow of these drug-resistant bacteria. What can be the possible causes? Over-prescription of antibiotics. So maybe there can be over-prescription, or you're forcing the doctor, please give me antibiotics, which is actually not needed in some cases. So there can be the under-consumption or over-consumption. Patients not finishing their treatment, overuse of antibiotics in livestock in order to enhance the overall production, lack of new antibiotics, lack of hygiene and poor sanitation leads to communicable diseases, poor infection control in hospitals, what we call as nosocomial infections. Nosocomial infections. Do remember these, what we call as hospital-acquired infections, HAIs, right? Now, as I told you, we have this particular good virus, bacteriophage, which basically attaches the surface of a bacteria, right? Transmits, the phage attaches to the bacterial cell. Very important, there can be a possible question in the prelims. It transmits a particular DNA into the host cell. Then this synthesis of, there are two cycles, lytic cycle and lysogenic cycles. Let's talk about the lytic cycles. Synthesis of new viral genomes and proteins. The new phages assemble, and ultimately these phages, these bacteriophages, they emerge out breaking the overall cell bacteria, right? In the other case, what happens is this particular DNA comes and it integrates with the bacterial genome and becomes a prophase. Then ultimately it continues to divide, leading to the condition to some form of a kind of disruption of the overall cell wall, right? So these are the two different ways in which the bacteriophage works. Let's have this particular article. Antibiotics don't work because the bacteria have developed resistance. It is estimated that globally about 5 million people are dying of the conditions related to the antimicrobial resistance. Each year, this may double by 2050. A very serious public health concern. More people are dying because of AMR than the cancers or other diseases. Pharmaceutical companies have lost interest in developing new antibiotics. Why? Antibiotics are given for just a few days. Also, due to the problem of AMR, new antibiotics are used as sparingly as possible to prevent the development of resistance. So they have no incentive, these pharmaceutical companies. They are rather focusing upon different areas. Therefore, there is no financial incentive for the companies to work upon new antibiotics. Bacteriophages are good viruses that naturally prey on bacteria. They are all around us. Water, in soil, in our gut, in our skin. They're believed to be 10 times as many phages as bacteria on Earth. Phages were beginning to be used against bacterial infections about a century ago, right? Not a new phenomena, but it has recently revived, right? But antibiotics superseded them once they were discovered. Unlike an antibiotic, phages may only kill a few strains of a particular bacterium. For countries in the Soviet bloc cut off from the antibiotics, continued to use them. Due to AMR, the rest of the world is now rediscovering the phages. Phages have been used for burns, foot ulcers, gut infections, respiratory infections, urinary tract infections, etc. The world is desperate for new treatment modalities for AMR. Thus far, no government in the Western world has approved phage as a drug. But they may allow the patient to access the phages in the form of compassionate use or emergency use expanded access. The regulatory headache may be solved if the following scenario works out. Create a device. What should be done, right? So in order to deal with the regulatory aspect, create a device in which all the following steps can be conducted. Isolate the bacteria from the infection. Sequence its genome. Use AI to determine which phage genome is the most likely to work. Create the phage from the scratch and administer it to the patient on the spot. These are the steps which are to be followed. The phage wouldn't be regulated as a drug. Instead, the device would be regulated. And this can be possibly very important for the prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is a very important article with respect to the overall demography of the country. So there are certain data points which the CRS civil registration system has basically come up with. Bihar has recorded the lowest sex ratio at the birth in 2022 among all the states and UTs. Just 891 girls born every 1,000 boys. The CRS system has basically come up with. Office of the Registrar General of India. Bihar is the only state that has seen its sex ratio at birth declining consistently since 2020. In 2020, the state reported an SRB, the sex ratio at birth of 964, which further reduced to 908 and then ultimately dipped to 891. Other states in the lower sex ratio at birth bracket for 2022 were Maharashtra, Telangana, Gujarat. Nagaland was a state with highest sex ratio at birth at 1068, followed by Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, Meghalaya and Kerala. Assam, which had reported the lowest SRB for 21 at 863, showed a spike in 2022. The SRS, this can be important from the aspects of the prelims. The sample registration system is the largest demographic survey in the country, meant to provide the annual estimates on fertility and mortality indicators such as birth rates and death rates. The CRS reported and the MCCD report provide data on registered births and deaths and causes of medically certified registered deaths respectively. Of the total registered births, the share of males was 52.4, whereas the share of females was 47.6. While about 43% of the births were registered in rural areas, almost 56.5 were registered in the urban areas. You need not to mug up the data, but the sample registration system becomes important, and the kind of trends we are having, that is really important. Of the total registered deaths in 2022, the shares of men and women were 60.4 and 39.6 respectively. So this is what you have to learn. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion, this is with respect to a very important regulatory and supervisory body, which is the Director General of GST Intelligence. So we have this article which says that the DGGI closes a 32,000 crore GST notice to Infosys. The Director General of GST Intelligence has closed the pre-show cause notice proceedings against Infosys for financial year 18-19 to 21-22, involving a GST amount of almost 32,000 crores. What is a pre-show cause notice? I am basically conducting an inquiry and I found some loopholes. So what I'll say is, before I conduct any severe action, before I basically take any action against you, please tell me the reasons for it. Please provide me information. That is a pre-show cause notice, right? So this is very important. But what this body is all about. So this has been taken from the PIB, and it says the Director General of GST Intelligence is an apex intelligence organization functioning under the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, entrusted with the task of collection, collation and dissemination of intelligence relating to the evasion of GST and duties of the Central Excise and Service Tax on all India basis, taken from the PIB. So we have the related information. So we have the DGI is related to the curbing of the evasion of GST. The character is concerned with the collection, collation and dissemination of intelligence, the same things. The DGI has headquarters in New Delhi with 4 sub-national units in different regions across the country. Function: collecting intelligence is a tough procedure. It comprises the analysis of the data utilizing the updated data analytics tool, including the AI and other things, of revenue, of the performance of sectors of industries, of specific companies in those sectors or industries, and of differences or mismatches in the submissions, which are basically with respect to the returns. So it is a kind of an intelligence agency, looks primarily the evasion of GST, right? This is very important. So that is it for today's discussion. I hope this session was really helpful to you. All the very best. Thank you so much.